Good evening. Glad you're here this evening. We are missing a whole side. Where did they go? Oh, we got some people going to fill it up. Hope you guys had a good day. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Is that right? Christmas? All right. Hope you guys had a good Christmas. All right. So here's we didn't know what to expect tonight, so we're going to do something a little bit unique. We're going to talk about Christmas on Christmas. Okay, now I know you're not kind of sometimes supposed to do that, but I think it's really important that that we talk about it every now and then. I usually talk about it in July. I've talked about it in July before because I know kind of our feelings around Christmas, but Christmas is a really unique holiday. But what I would like to do is I would like to talk about what something that maybe and just maybe we've avoided from time to time is the history of Christmas. Now, I'm going to throw this out there, and it's mainly for people who may or may not be watching online or who are going to watch online later. I'm not sure that if you have kids who are really into Christmas, that you watch it, if you know what I mean, right? Everybody kind of knows what I mean by that. This is a yes, this is a no, this is sugar coma from eating all the Christmas food. The reason I'm not going to ruin anything, but kids have this really funny knack of not listening but listening, and I don't want to blow something up for a family that may or may not be there. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But if you have your Bibles, you may want to open your Bibles to either Matthew chapter 2 or to Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2. Now, before I say this, let me put some qualifying statements on this, okay? Some kind of like some asterisks that you're supposed to read. It's kind of like the spiritual legal print. I'm not saying that celebrating Christmas is wrong. I'm not saying that next Christmas here we're going to bring in a bunch of trees and bring in a fat man and build a chimney or anything like that, all right? So I had to get that out of the way just because it's a really kind of interesting thing to talk about. But here's the fun part about it. There's a lot of background to Christmas that we probably have questions about. And when we find out some of those answers, it either does one of two things. It helps us to explain a story, or it helps us to, for lack of a better term, it helps us to even avoid a story. Okay? And I'll get more into that in a second. By the way, I'm going to do my best to make this fun for you guys because I know it's probably pretty boring. If you're a history person, you may go, this is great. If you're not a history person, you'll be like, why did I come here? I get it. I really do. But I want you to these are some things I want you to remember. These are all the words that if you kind of follow along with where we're going to go, that you will see some of these words kind of often repeated. For instance, the word Yule. We're going to talk about what Yule is and what a Yule log is. All right, that's something that's kind of a Christmassy thing that a lot of people kind of get lost in that. But it's something that is used to be, at least, as I've talked with people. I guess anyone, and I'm going to stereotype people. I shouldn't do this. Anybody usually under the age of about 30, I'll say, hey, it's Yule season. And they'll go, you mean what? What's a Yule? And I go, okay, so kind of not there. But Yule, the next one is going to be Rome. Rome is a pretty big one when it comes to Christmas. And this word, once again, for the people on live stream, I'm actually pointing my hand into the screen. But the one all the way over there, it's Saturnalia. Does anybody know what Saturnalia is? Okay, cool. It's a word that you don't have to know. It's not in the Bible. It's not going to be a question on the doorstep of heaven. But it's interesting to know when it comes to where we're going to be. But also the winter solstice. Christmas was canceled. Did you guys know Christmas was canceled for a while in our country? By law, it was canceled. Did anybody know that? Once again, another really cool story. St. Nicholas, we're going to talk about caroling, and we're going to talk about June 26th of 1870. So all of those have to do with the holiday of Christmas. Now, I will say this. One of the most religious holidays in America is Christmas. You know what the second one is, right? Easter. And there's a lot about Easter that I think sometimes we kind of overlook. Now, you probably know me. And I tell people this, my kind of position in life is to take everything as an opportunity. And I love Christmas. I've tried to understand more about Christmas. I do not like, this is a personal statement, I do not like the commercialization of Christmas, even though I play right into it, okay? But Christmas is an opportunity because so many of my friends who are not Christians look to Christmas, and it's the opportunity to share with them the birth of Jesus. Like, here's a really good one. If you are in Matthew chapter 2, I want to share this with you just really quick. This is something that a lot of people sort of kind of leave out, but I think it's very interesting. Go to verse 7 for a minute of Matthew chapter 2, if you're there. It says, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained of them what time the star had appeared. Remember the wise men followed the star when it appeared? Okay, really kind of important thing. I just had this discussion, and it was a lot of fun. It says that he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go search diligently for the child. Verse 9, after listening to the king, they went their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose before them came and rested over the place where the child was. Here's what's very interesting. Once again, I don't want to blow anybody's Christmas out of season, all right? But did you notice the difference in the word baby and child? It's estimated that the wise men had followed the star for 2 years. Now, can you think of the dedication that these individuals had to follow a star for 2 years? And the star apparently moved because it came to rest over where the child was. Now, notice this. Once again, really interesting. Verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, right? Because they finally had their place. Verse 11, and going into the what? House. It's a different word than the word manger. So I had this discussion with a friend of mine, and we laughed about it, and we carried on about it a little bit. But I said, you know, with a lot of live nativities, it would be interesting for the next 2 years if you saw a group of guys dressed up as magi just wandering around town for a while. Then 2 years later, they walk into a house where the child is. And he said, that is so crazy. Where did you come up with that? I was like, there we go, right? Somebody came up to me this year, and they said, hey, I can't wait to talk about the 3 wise men. And I said, 3? I heard there were 47. 40? How did you get 47? Where'd you get 3? And it became a really fun discussion. Like this one. Why would you give a child gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Anybody ever had a baby and you said, hey, I'm going to get you some frankincense and myrrh? And you kind of went, that's a great gift. It had to do with the times and the honoring and the culture. We don't have time for that tonight. But that's what I mean is all of these things really become, if you will, an opportunity for people. Now, some of you remember this movie, right? Or this little Christmas. We're going to talk about this during the devotional time as well. But some of you remember Peanuts Christmas. Did you know when that first played, it was not supposed to be on? They never thought it was going to be there. Everybody didn't want it to be on. The executives of the television did not want it to be on because they did not think that the Christmas story was going to be what it was. But yet many of us, how many people grew up, you or your children watched the Christmas story, watched the Peanuts Christmas? A lot of people watched that, and it became that speech that we'll talk about later. It became that speech of Linus at the end that captivated everybody. And what it did was it captivated a nation. That's why it was played every year until a few years ago. And the reason, and you can research this on your own, the reason it kind of stopped being played on national television a few years ago was not political, but it had to do with the power of the American dollar. One company bought it, and they bought all the rights to it. So it was only played on their particular network. So you had to subscribe to what their service was. So that's what I mean by sort of the commercialization of Christmas when you get around to it. Now, let's get into fun stuff for a second. There's this thing called the winter solstice. In fact, when was the shortest daylight of the year? Do you know? The 21st, December 21st, which was when? All right, a few days ago, Saturday, which means if it's the shortest day, then it's the longest what? It's the longest night. Now, that comes into play when you start throwing into history, and you start throwing into this really fun thing called the winter solstice. It's the shortest day. We always talk about that. What we don't talk about sometimes is it's the longest night. Now, we'll mention it when we talk about, hey, I'm going to sleep for the longest I can. Maybe you're one of those people, but it's the longest night. Now, It's up on the screen right there that says the northern hemisphere, that's us, is December 21st, but in the southern hemisphere, it's usually around June. So sometimes we don't think about that. You know, the earth tilts and, you know, it kind of spins around and all that kind of fun stuff. We just kind of get centered where we're at. But there's a lot of things that happened in the winter solstice, and one of those happened to be this. Happened to be a feast that was held in honor of the god of Saturn, which was an agricultural god. Now, once again, I'm not going to be a downer for this because I think it's pretty interesting, actually. So it was a feast of Saturnalia. And that's what it's called. It was Saturnalia. It was a Roman feast to this god and in honor of the god of agriculture. And here's how it started. It started with a one-day festival. It's right up there. It's a one-day celebration, but it turned into a week-long festival. Now, here's the wild part about it. This will factor in to what I mentioned a little bit ago when I told you that Christmas was banned in part of our country. Have you ever heard of the song 12 Days of Christmas? Okay. There was a quote from a man who said that people will party more in the 12 days before Christmas than they will all of the rest of the year. And he didn't say that as a positive thing. He didn't say that as being positive. He said that to be negative because it dates all the way back to this festival. This festival, Saturnalia, was pretty interesting because it turned into a week-long festival. And this is the way that you probably can think about it, and it may seal it in your mind. It just didn't turn into a week-long festival. It turned into a week-long Mardi Gras. Okay? And everybody kind of knows what happens during Mardi Gras. Like, it's not a place where you're like, hey, let's take the church group down to Mardi Gras. Like, you're not going to do that. But it turned into this crazy festival that became, in their way, in Roman times, it became like a Roman Mardi Gras. And you know what was happening during this time. I mean, you could probably, and don't picture it too much in your mind, but all of this started happening with this term, Saturnalia. Now, just hold on to that thought for a minute, and you may start to see something very interesting. During the festival, everybody, as it started the one-day festival, everybody had the day off. Like, everybody who worked in Rome had the day off. Not only did they have the day off, all the schools in Rome shut down. Not just everybody had the day off and all the schools shut down, but if you were a slave, even in the Roman Empire, and we know how they treated slaves, right? I mean, they were not the best to their slaves. Even the slaves had the day off for Saturnalia because it was an everybody type party. So as a result of that, you start to see, maybe you do, maybe you don't, maybe you see a little bit of similarities, but probably not. But notice the next one. The decorations during this period of time included pine wreaths. Sound a little bit familiar? Okay? Included some pine wreaths, lighted candles, and they had parties and feasts, which you talk about, and they exchanged gifts. Usually that happened on the very last day that they would exchange gifts. Now, the whole pine situation goes down further in history to a Christmas tree. Because a lot of people believed, especially in Germany, and I think it's up here on a slide in a moment you'll see, the Christmas tree really, as we know it, really originated out of Germany. And do you know what pine trees are supposed to keep away? Nobody? Pine trees are supposed to keep away evil spirits and ghosts. Now, I don't know if you knew that or not. I didn't know that until I really started researching this a few years ago. Many people believe that the pine trees are what keeps away those things, and here's why. What always keeps its needles, really, until it dies? Pine tree. You've got, you look at a pine forest, they're going to lose a little bit, but they're not going to go totally bare. So there was this thing that, hey, they have this magical ability to keep a lot of things away. Hence, many people they started getting into this idea of having this pine that was there. So they got into pine wreaths. Later in Germany, that became pine trees. And it even came that people would bring those pine trees into their house. They would use lighted candles on there. They believe that Martin Luther was actually the first person to have a Christmas tree who really kind of brought forth the idea of having lighted candles on a Christmas tree. That later became, for us, one of Thomas Edison's apprentices, a guy that worked with Thomas Edison, one of his partners, actually developed in just lost the date, I think it's like 1890, 1896. He actually developed the first Christmas tree lights. Now, in that period of time, right before 1900, those sold for $300 for a 12-bulb string. Today, that's thousands and thousands of dollars, easily, as to what that was going to amount to. But that tradition kind of carried on with the lighted candles and all of those things. It was very interesting. During this festival, they would also, remember it's celebrating the god of agriculture, they would kill a fatted calf, or they would kill cattle. And the reason they would do that, once again, I think interesting, you probably think boring, but it's very interesting that they would kill some cattle over this so they didn't have to feed them all the winter, because it was going to be expensive to feed cattle all the winter, so they decided to kill some cattle and start to eat it. So whether you kind of get into that or not, that's kind of what it was. And also, they would sacrifice a pig. And here's what's interesting. Every spark that came from the fire, when the pig was on the fire, they believed that that was going to be a new animal that was going to be born to them in the year. So they associated this feast with the god of agriculture. So it was pretty interesting. At the end here, Sigillia and Signalia, those two things. This one is the last day of the feast, and this was the gift that they would give to each other. Now, to understand the gift a little bit, who knows what terracotta is? Anybody knows what terracotta? What is terracotta? Okay, it's like pottery. They would exchange terracotta gifts to each other. And if you look up that term that's right there online, it almost looks like a little tiny pine tree. And they would have these terracotta gifts that they would make during the year, and they would exchange these during this festival. So this festival started in Rome, and it's important as we move forward from this that you see how this festival kind of started, because remember, as this festival is starting, you still have Christians, you still have religious individuals living in Rome during this time. So, since we talk about festivals and feasts, how many people here drink eggnog? How many people think eggnog is the worst thing in the entire world? How many people do not know what eggnog is? Okay, how many people are scared to raise their hands in church as I talk about Christmas? All right, a couple of you. Excellent. All right. So, when did eggnog come about? You have any idea? This is pretty wild. George Washington had his own eggnog recipe, and let's just say that it had a lot of alcohol in it. It's probably how he got through the winter. But eggnog actually started off in Jamestown. You guys remember Jamestown? You know, the colony at Jamestown and all the stuff that happened. It actually began in Jamestown. They estimate that eggnog began in 1607, just a few years ago, that eggnog kind of made its way into the States. They're not sure, and I haven't found through history. I've found a lot of differing kind of ways that it got here. I'm not sure how it happened, but they said that eggnog was first. It was used in Jamestown in the settlement in about 1607. So as we think about feasts and festivals, probably a lot of us we had a bunch of meals together and we celebrated some time, because that's kind of part of the Christmas tradition. Now, I mentioned that feast in Rome because here's what happened. As the Roman Empire, do you remember how much of the world they conquered? Pretty much all of it. You know, when you think about it, that influence started to spread. And as that influence started to spread a little bit more, those traditions started to spread into different cultures and different places and different areas. Well, it made its way into Scandinavia. And in Norway and Finland and Denmark, and it made its way into that area. And when it did, a lot of these traditions started to change over. Like if we were to go back in time to Germany and see some of the first Christmas trees, some people didn't bring a tree into their house. They made a tree out of wood, and they decorated it with candles, and they put their ornaments around their tree. But they put evergreen on the tree. Some cultures, I don't know if you know this or not. Anybody ever seen an upside down Christmas tree? Like it's like the stump is hung from the ceiling? Okay, there were cultures that hung the tree upside down. That was just their way. It wasn't really symbolic of anything. I guess they wanted to be different, but they hung their tree upside down. In the United States, it's estimated like 70% of people during Christmas have a Christmas tree that's normal, that's Americanized, that's standing right side up. So you see how these traditions kind of get passed down. Well, it goes all the way into Scandinavia, and it creates this thing called Yule. You've probably heard of Yule log. Everybody heard it? Most people heard of Yule log? Okay, when we hear Yule log, what do we think of? Log? All right, you think of a big log, and what do you do with a log? Okay, you burn it. You hear, I have a tendency to watch one movie, if you follow my Facebook, repeatedly, in the month of December. And one of the things is in the movie, they said, well, let's throw the Yule log on the fire. Well, that dates itself back to as that tradition of Saturnalia started to come into Scandinavia, they started getting this idea of Yule. And what Yule was in Scandinavia was they would celebrate it with this girl called St. Lucia. Now, St. Lucia, some people say St. Lucia, but it's Lucia. Here's what was very interesting. During this period of time, one of the girls from the house, what they would do is they would dress up in all white, and they would go around the house with candles, lighting things up, lighting the candles on the house. Yes, it goes to wearing the candles on your head, actually on her shoulders and things. Now imagine that for a second. Wearing a candle on your shoulder. Anybody want to do that every year? Okay. Fellas, don't worry. It was not for a guy, it was for a girl. Yeah, but wore candles and really got this, and you've probably seen the images like an angelic type, it's what you think of. But it was celebrated in Scandinavia, and it got to be part of it. In fact, if you were going to go out and do stuff, you had to have a special light or a lighted candle to kind of go out. It was this transformative nature that would happen during the holidays, and it really symbolized, ready for this? It really kind of symbolized purity. When we think of white, what do we think of? We think of purity. So started to transition just a little bit, and the idea of a Yule log goes back to Norway. And in Norway, the idea of a Yule log translated into their language meant wheel. And it actually, ready for this? This is where it's going to get really kind of weird. It was not just one log. It was a circle. And they would light those logs, and they would burn this circle, and it was to be the wheel, or what many have believed that it was the passing of time. Because when Yule happened, and when all these festivals happened, you're getting ready to move into a new year. So it was passing from one year and passing to another. Now, with the idea of a Yule log too, if you look this up and you dig kind of deep enough, you'll find out that there were countries who actually, and it goes back to Rome a little bit. They would throw a log. They would cut down the biggest log they could find, and it became a really kind of an odd tradition. And they would throw that log into the fire. And as long as that log still burned, the party could still continue. Now I want you to think about that for a moment. So do you think they got smaller logs every year, or they developed into throwing trees in there? It developed into trees in there. They started cutting the biggest things they could find to throw them into the fire so it would burn longer, so they could continue this party just a little bit longer. So that's really where Yule comes from, is this idea of burning these logs, or this wheel that's there. Now, if you haven't figured this out yet, America has taken a lot of these traditions and we've kind of pulled them in, haven't we? We've pulled a lot of these traditions in. Sort of the idea of a mistletoe. Does anybody have a mistletoe hanging in their house? Nobody? Nobody's that much into it? Okay, a couple people do. What are you supposed to do? I know the background, so it's kind of funny. So what are you supposed to do when you're underneath the mistletoe and you're standing there or two people pass? They're supposed to, what did you say, smooch, Janice? Janice said smooch. She sounded kind of excited. I was a little bit worried. Okay, so does anybody know where that tradition comes from besides Norse mythology? Okay, sorry, it's kind of funny. It comes from, and I gotta be very careful because it's on live stream. It comes from the idea of having a very fertile year. Can I say it that way? So it's not just about kissing somebody, but it's the Norse goddess. They believed that she would kiss people under the mistletoe, and it was a sign of fertility. So if you have, and once again, I'm not trying to ruin anything for you because I think it's interesting how we've done it. So if you have mistletoe in your house and two people kiss in it, it's wishing them a very fertile year. That's kind of like the Bible and the King James saying that Adam knew Eve. We all know what that means, right? I just don't want some little kid watching the live stream going back and say, hey, Mom, under the mistletoe, you'll have a fertile year. Now they'll probably say it because I did. But, that's really what it goes back to. Transition for a moment. Do you guys know what the Easter egg thing is, right? You give an Easter egg to somebody, that's a sign that you're wishing them a very fertile year. That goes back to the European tradition. So, yeah, that's kind of odd. But anyways, we'll move on from there. The modern version of Christmas is, of course, what we get from England. That we have kind of brought a lot of these over with our culture and our language. Now, when it comes to Christmas trees, I mentioned earlier, Christmas trees really have to do with Germany, with the idea of bringing those over. Many people thought that in doing that you would keep ghosts and evil spirits out of your house during a very precious time of the year. Now, I don't know if that's what you do or not, but I know people, when we lived in Charleston, I had an individual tell me that that's why they planted certain bushes around their house, so it would keep the evil spirits out. And I kind of just went, okay. They said, what do you do for evil spirits? And I said, well, I keep the window shut. I didn't know how to answer. But it goes backwards in belief systems, right? So it's very interesting. How about this one? Anybody have poinsettias? Or as they say in other parts of the country, poinsettias? All right. Do we know where they came from? Mexico? Okay, Jack says Mexico. We got some nods for Mexico. We got some other nods. Let's just move on with it. All right. So this is actually where it came from. They are named after, I don't know if you can see that right there, Joel R. Poinsett. He was an American minister who came to Mexico, and he brought those back with him. And notice here, he brought those back in 1828. And here's where the odd part starts. One of the papers out of New York took the poinsettias, or poinsettias, however you would like to say it, took the plant, and they put the plant, and they started selling the plant as a Christmas plant. So guess what happened? Everybody had to have them during the Christmas season. The first Christmas card, actually in England, just said Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And it was just sent, as people just sent them to small individuals that they knew. And guess what happened with the card company? They kind of grabbed it, and they kind of put it out there and said, hey, you've got to start sending Christmas cards to the people that are around you. So as America has adopted some of these traditions and some of these things, we've noticed some things. The idea of caroling. Anybody here been Christmas caroling? Okay. Do you know the background of Christmas caroling? Do you know a little bit of the background, Casey? Oh, you don't? Okay. Huh? Not too, okay. Don't read yet. Who else went Christmas caroling? Do you know the background of Christmas caroling? This is actually very interesting, and I have a new excitement for Christmas caroling over the past couple years. All right, I've never understood it. I'm not one of those singing people. I kind of sing by the letter, just open it up and just let it fly, and just hope for the best. But there's an interesting thing about Christmas caroling. Christmas caroling, as you can see there, it came from the UK, and people would sing Christmas carols like we trick or treat. You know, when you trick or treat, you knock on the door, and somebody's supposed to give you what? Candy. When people went Christmas caroling in the UK, they would sing at people's homes and as an expectation that they were going to get some food. I kind of like that idea, right? So that's how it started, and it actually didn't start off as like, hey, let's get a church group together and go caroling. It started off as, hey, these are some people who were not as wealthy or as fortunate during the holidays, singing some songs to people in their homes, and those people would give them food. Now, I doubt today that we would get a group up and say, hey, you know what? Kevin and Jan aren't here. Let's use them. They'll watch this later, and they'll probably hear about it. We're going to go to Kevin and Jan's house, and we're going to go caroling, and they're going to give us some hamburgers and french fries. Sound like a good idea? Anybody want to go to their house a little bit later? Oh, wow, I just got some volunteers. Let's go. But that's how caroling kind of started. Now, we look at that and we go, that just doesn't seem like that. But I want you to think back to if you've ever watched a really good version of the Christmas Carol. If you've ever gone back and watched those versions of sort of like old-time England, old-time Britain, old-time America, it was a different time, wasn't it? So when you look at caroling, that's how it started, and that's how it continued. Now, you probably know about this next one, don't you? Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Did you know that he was a marketing campaign by Montgomery Wards? Did you know that? In 1939, they crafted an idea to get more things sold and more things available into people so that they would come into the store. So they hired an illustrator, and he started to really put forth some ideas, and one of those was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Because he wasn't one of the original reindeer, right? He came later. In fact, it doesn't say that Dancer's nose glowed, because he's just a regular reindeer. All of those things started to take, as the American economy started to take off in the early 1900s, there started to be this idea of pulling people in. In fact, when you see Santa Claus drinking a bottle of soda, what is he drinking? He's drinking Coca-Cola. It became a massive advertisement campaign. I'll share one with you here in just a moment. Christmas as a holiday. We'll talk about it in a second, if I can, really quick. But when did it become a national holiday? How far back do you think? Anybody know? Anybody want to venture a guess? Remember the date? June 26, 1870? It became a national holiday. It was first a holiday in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts was not like we think of Massachusetts. That's when it was very big, when our country was first founded. But it became a federal holiday. It was signed into law, and it was proclaimed a day that everybody's going to take off work, that nobody's going to do any work, that this is going to be a Christmas holiday in 1870. That's when it became federal. Now, the idea of Christmas being canceled is very interesting, and here's where we get into the religious side of the Christmas holiday. Once again, I've left off the birth of Jesus until now. Do you remember the Pilgrims? And they sailed, and they came over here, and they ran into that big rock, Plymouth Rock, and then they had the first Thanksgiving, and la 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 la. By the way, ADD moment, Thanksgiving. Do you know what song that we sing at Christmas was originally written as a Thanksgiving song? I bet you do. I bet you know that. Does anybody know it? It's actually, you'll get a kick out of this for those of you who grew up in the South. It was actually written by someone who fought in the Confederate Army to the disdain of his northern parents. Do you know who it was? Or you know what the song was? The song is actually Jingle Bells. It was actually written as a Thanksgiving song, not necessarily a Christmas song. And it was a song, if translated back during the holidays, that was considered to be a Confederate song. So a lot of people with a Confederate background and who love the history of the Confederacy will hold on to Jingle Bells and say, that's our song. And it's really not about Christmas. If you read it, it's about basically drag racing in a sled and doing some other things. But it's a very interesting song. And this is why some of this happened. There was a difference in the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Okay, do you know what the difference is between the Pilgrims and the Puritans? Okay, the Pilgrims came for religious freedom. The Puritans came to take anything that was not in the Bible and totally out the window. They came to purify religion. So there's the difference. Pilgrims came for religious freedom. Puritans were here, and the transition happened a little bit after the Pilgrims arrived, but these Puritans came, and they wanted to purify the church and really almost to what I would call, this is Chris Gallagher personal opinion, to become very Pharisaical in their piety, their perceived holiness regarding religion. So one thing that the Puritans did is the Puritans in Massachusetts put forward this massive effort, a huge effort, and they banned Christmas. And I want to tell you why they banned Christmas. I think this is extremely interesting. They banned Christmas, I don't know if you can see that, from 1659 to 1681. And when they banned Christmas, there was to be nothing done about Christmas. Now, history kind of tells if you wanted to celebrate in your own house, you just kept pretty quiet about it and you didn't make it known. But it was banned. It was illegal. Like there were laws against Christmas. And one of the reasons is because kind of the reason that's here. I said the Puritans banned Christmas because there was no mention of a season or a day that marked the birth of Jesus. They came back and said, listen, we don't have a day to celebrate Christmas. We don't have for lack of a better term, thou shalt celebrate the birth of Jesus. So therefore, we're going to make it illegal. So they made it illegal, but there was another little effort that was there. And part of that effort is as people in history, okay, and especially in Europe, as they would practice the Roman holiday of Saturnalia, they would go from December 17th, and it was a week-long festival, which brought them to what day? Got them to Christmas Eve. So they would drink and party and do all of this, the Bible would say, I think the King James probably proper word was licentious living. And they would do all of that until Christmas Eve. Then they would end up going to church on Christmas Day. Then, what many people would do after that is they would leave church, then they would go continue their partying. So the Puritans noticed that was happening in America a little bit, that people were starting to do this. Once again, tradition started to carry over. So the Puritans decided, hey, listen, I got an idea. We're going to ban Christmas. And they did. They banned Christmas for all of those years, and what came up a little bit after that became very interesting. One of the mayors, it said the governor, but I think it goes back to a mayor, actually attended a Christmas celebration. And as a result of that, the ban started to go away. So for a while, no matter what you think of a religious person, at least in our country, you find out that Christmas apparently at one time was banned. Now, let's get into this if we can really quick. Let's talk about this person named Santa Claus. Santa Claus is a pretty funny guy throughout history. You know, and you probably know this, he was probably born in what's called Myra. It's in modern day Turkey now. He was actually a bishop. There's a lot of interesting things that are said about somebody when they pass. And there's a lot of stories that come up probably about 280 AD. And as he became this bishop in what we would call the Roman Catholic Church, he gave all of his family's inheritance. They're a very wealthy family. He gave all of their family's inheritance away. It is said, I think I have it up here. Maybe I do not. But he gave all that away to take care of the poor and the sick. And there's stories about how he purchased, now just take your mind back for a second, how he purchased and got 3 young girls out of the slave trade. Still occurring today, right? You know, we call it child trafficking. But he purchased 3 girls, got them out of the slave trade. He was known, and you probably have heard about this, there's stories of how he put coins in kids' shoes, which is where we get what you hang around the chimney called a stocking. So he put coins in kids' shoes. But it's very interesting, on December 6th, after he passed away, it became St. Nicholas Day. Now, St. Nicholas is Sinterklaas. If you go back to the German, now we don't say that too often, is you go back to Sinterklaas, which we brought into America. When I say we, kind of American. So we brought it into America and we turned it into Santa Claus. Now, I want to ask a really quick question in the few minutes that we have. What does Santa Claus look like? What's that? A jolly old man. What else? He's got a bowl full of... Chance, you're reading the wrong version. He's got a bowl full of jelly. He's got red cheeks. He's got a corncob pipe, or whatever. Maybe that's Frosty. He's got one of those, right? He's got this pipe and he's got all this stuff. Do you know when that picture of Santa Claus got changed? That picture of Santa Claus, if you look back through history, I should have said, parents, if you're watching the live stream, boot your kids out. That picture of Santa Claus got changed when this was written by Clement Clark Moore, an account of the visit of St. Nicholas. Has anybody read that account of the visit of St. Nicholas? Has anybody ever read that before? Chances are you have. The American version is called "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." That was written by Clement Clark Moore, and as he wrote that story, the image of Sinterklaas, the image of Santa Claus changed. And in fact, if you just go back and you Google some of the images of Santa Claus, you'll find out something. Santa Claus used to kind of look normal, for lack of a better term. He kind of looked like everybody else, but then he changed, right? And when he changed into the jolly old man that you see in the mall, or the jolly old man that you see in the pictures. And as that changed, our view of all that changed. Now, why did I tell you all of that? I told you all that to tell you this. When we go back and we look at Christmas, and religious groups have fought about this for thousands and thousands of years. Now, I have my personal opinion. You probably have your personal opinion on it. I told you that I look at this as a simple opportunity to provide a little bit of education into the idea of what it is. Because even as we go back here, it wasn't until the 3rd century that they even started to talk about having a holiday dedicated to the birth of Jesus. And as you go down through, I put there that final line there. The Roman church finally fixated the date in about 310 after a great persecution of the church took place. And they used December 25th during the winter solstice because there was a lot of things going on. People already gathered together. And as some believe, and I think there's great credibility, is they took this day to turn people into a different pattern. They took a pagan holiday of Saturnalia, dated back thousands and thousands of years, and turned that into what we know of as being December 25th, which is a day that we talk about as being Christmas. Now, the very interesting part about this, and I'll share this with you, we'll come back and we'll talk about something in a few moments about the American side of it. In Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20, there's a passage by Joseph. And the passage by Joseph simply says, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Now, that's in Joseph's life, where his brothers meant him great harm. And God took something that was very bad and turned that into something that's very good. Now, I don't know how you feel about Christmas, but I do know as you look at all the things that happen through the course of time, and how now we have Christmas trees, we have pine needles, we have Sinterklaas, we have all of those things that come into our realm. We've now taken something that the world for hundreds of years has even seen as troubling, and we've brought that down to an opportunity, however you celebrate it, as an opportunity to open a door to somebody's life, to share with them the gospel of Christ. And I'll share more with you in a few moments about that. Jack's going to lead us in singing here in just a minute, and I'll have some devotional thoughts. Then after that, we'll extend the invitation. But I wanted to at least give you a little bit of the background of the things of Christmas, so that we become, as we even talk about it in whatever position, that we become maybe a little bit more educated, maybe a little bit more knowledgeable of things, so that we can explain them to the world around us. Because I do think, and I will say this over and over, I think it is a tremendous opportunity that we have every year, that even if we don't think that Jesus was born in December, it was probably April, to be honest, knowing the census and the time and the shepherds and all that, it's an opportunity, a massive one, to share with somebody the gospel of Jesus. So just something to think about. If you want any of those notes, I'll be glad to provide them to you, or the sources. I'll do that as well. But here in a few moments, our folks are going to come in, and we will extend the invitation to you. So thank you very much.
Sit up tall and straight. Take a deep breath. And we'll sing some songs.
Wanted to share with you, you can go ahead and put up that first picture if you want to, Kip. That one right there. Is there one right after that one too? Okay. I want to share, we're going to talk about that picture here in just a moment. You probably know what that is, but I want to share with you a few announcements. By the way, if you haven't filled out an attendance card, please grab one of those, fill that out, pass it to the center aisle. One of our men will come around and collect those. Continue to remember Buddy Aikens in your prayers. He is going through some treatments right now, and he needs your prayers. Also, there is a list of individuals to pray for in the bulletin. Please take a look at that. Continue to pray for the Atchley family. The funeral for Charles will be this coming Friday. It's going to be at Crestwood Funeral Home. The visitation is going to be from 11 to 1, and the funeral service is going to be at 1 p.m. Several of you, and we appreciate so much those who've offered to cook something for the meal that's going to take place after the service. So we thank you for that, and thank you for your participation. Continue to remember that family in your prayers. What I want to leave you with tonight is something that we talked about a little bit earlier, is the idea of a Charlie Brown Christmas. And I had this discussion a couple times this week because this was something a lot of people grew up hearing, and it captivated the nation for a while. And this scene right here happened right towards the end where Charlie Brown, if you remember, he had that weird-looking Christmas tree, you know, the one that nobody really wanted. And he had that tree, and it was slumped over, and they're really kind of making fun of him, and all this is happening. And Charlie Brown says to Linus, now everybody knows Linus because he carried that blanket. And he had that blanket, but you know the speech of Linus, right? But what took place right before it was Linus said this. He said, or Charlie Brown said this, I guess you were right, Linus. I shouldn't have picked that little tree. Everything I do turns into a disaster. I guess I really don't know what Christmas is or Christmas is all about. And he says very loudly in the movie, he says, isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about? And Linus, he says, sure, Charlie Brown, I can tell you what Christmas is all about. So Linus walks to the center of the stage, and he says, lights, please. And he speaks these words. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over the flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, fear not, for behold, I bring you glad tidings of joy, which shall be to all the people. And this shall be a sign to you, you shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill towards men. As Linus said that, standing there on that stage, something very interesting happened that not a lot of people ever noticed. Linus, for one of the first times in all the Peanuts comic strips and all the Peanuts movies, Linus dropped his blanket. Did you ever notice that? Did you ever notice when Linus dropped his blanket? Now, a lot of people have gotten way too deep into this. They talk about all the psychological things of Linus carrying a blanket and all of that. I'm not here to get into all that. I will just say this. If you go back and watch, Linus dropped his blanket when he said these words. As he's holding his blanket, the camera's about to switch. He says, and the angel said unto them, fear not. And at the words, fear not, the one who carried his security blanket for all of those shows, for all of those comic strips, dropped his blanket. It's very interesting because if Linus found security in his blanket, he dropped it when he said, fear not. And the words continued, fear not, for behold, I will bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all the people. As Linus continues those phrases, is at the end when he finally mentions the words, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill towards men. As he says that, his lips stop moving, he reaches down, he grabs his blanket, and he marches off stage. Is there significance in the idea that he dropped his blanket at the words, fear not? Was his security found in the words of the Bible as he quoted them from the Gospels? If you know Charles Schulz, there very well could be. So I would ask you a very simple question, sort of about Linus, but more about Jesus. Where do you find your security? Where do you find your hope? And where do you find your strength? Is it in the words, fear not, for behold, I will bring you glad tidings of great joy, which shall be to all the people. We know that Jesus is our hope, that Jesus is our strength. If you're here tonight and you need to respond to the invitation, we will pray with you and we'll pray for you. If there's anything that we can do to help you out this evening, we want to do that because we want you to find your security and hope in the Son of God. If we can help you out tonight, you can make your way to the front while together we stand and as we sing.
When we walk with God, Lord, in the light of His word, one
know that we have some visitors. We hope that everybody, that if you're continuing traveling and going places, be safe out there. And we certainly want to remember the Ashley family, and we certainly want to hope that everybody will be back this Sunday for worship. And we will have someone pick up the cards. If you have not filled out the card, go ahead and do that real quick. And they'll come as we sing this song, and then we'll have a prayer at the close. Okay.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him from creatures hearing low. Praise Him above ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
Let us bow in prayer as we're dismissed. Our loving and kind Heavenly Father, we appreciate so much your grace and mercy in our lives. Father, we thank you for today. We thank you that even the whole world stops to take a moment to think about your Son Jesus. And Father, we pray that as we go throughout the year in our lives, that we'll continue to let your light shine through us so that people can see you and the things that we do. Father, we're grateful that we get to spend some time with family together during these moments of the year. And Father, may we appreciate those times. Father, may we reach out to those who are less fortunate than we are. And Father, may we always, within our life, be appreciative of your Son Jesus. And may we be thankful and grateful that he died on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins, that he rose, and Father, that we can all be with you in heaven together one day. Father, once again, thank you for loving us and being with us today. We ask all this in your Son Jesus'